Welcome to the special sustainability-focused episode of Business Talk with me, Michael Avery, here on Business Tech. And it's time to don our hard hats as Sibanye, the world's biggest producer of platinum, wants to grow its gold mining portfolio. And the company is also investing in new assets for metals used in the production of batteries to diversify its revenue beyond PGMs and gold. It's made several acquisitions in recent years, including an 85% stake in Finnish mining and battery chemical company Keliber, and Eramet Sandouville, the hydrometallurgical processing facilities of French mining group Eramet. It's also invested around $70 million in the Rhyolite Ridge project in the US, which is expected to be one of the first large-scale US lithium producers. And at the recent Joburg Mining Indaba, CEO Neil Froneman was saying that jurisdiction isn't the only consideration when you're shopping for new assets here. One of the most important criteria for Sibanye is ESG aspects. He said there's no sense in buying assets that won't let you reach climate neutrality. With that, I'm joined now by Themba Nkosi, who's the Chief Sustainability Officer at Sibanye-Stillwater. Themba, great to chat to you. Welcome to the show. Sustainability and ESG in mining is obviously quite a buzzword at the moment. Can you just explain a little bit more about your role at Sibanye-Stillwater?
Yeah, thanks, Michael, and good day to you and the listeners. What we do as a company in terms of doing business that does great around people, planet, and our products. And that's basically how I would define my role. And my role is about ensuring that we deliver superior shared value for all our stakeholders, be it in every ecosystem in which we operate, by ensuring that we're driving responsible, but also responsive mining practices that impact positively on society. And impact positive is a good underliner because we need to be mindful of our practices in terms of our industry and ensure that we mitigate the impacts that we have on society, but also ensure that we create sufficient flows of value that are shared across all our stakeholders to create a positive and lasting impact.
And I think that's a good point to raise, because often I think when we think of ESG, it's with a capital E, and sometimes we forget about the S. And that positive value that you're creating is also for the communities in employment. And it's a big conversation that we're having in the just transition at the moment. You know, what do you do, for example, in the coal producing areas as we transition away from coal, because coal is still an important employer. Now, before this, you worked at ArcelorMittal, so not an altogether unfamiliar space for you. What experience did you gain working at Arcelor that sets you up for this position?
Yeah, I mean, besides dealing with the complexity of the steel environment in terms of ensuring that we create good policies or lobby government to work with us in creating good policies and frameworks that ensures that the environment is conducive for the steel industry at the time. I mean, I recall at the time we were faced with floods of cheap Chinese imports into the country. The steel industry at the time didn't have any protection, be it import duties or safeguard measures. We were also faced with a situation where total erosion of trust had happened, and trust between all stakeholders, be it government, be it communities, be it NGOs. And we actually had to work in ensuring that the steel industry as an enabler of development of the country, number one, but second, of the value chain within South Africa and the economies where we operated, in Saldanha, Newcastle, and Vanderbilt, was ensuring that we keep that role as an economic driver. I think a typical example was when I was at ArcelorMittal in 2016. We had come from the Vanderbilt plant alone, had employed about 24,000 employees in 2008. And with the lack of growth in the steel industry, a couple of plants had been shut down. Certain capabilities were completely removed out of South Africa. And in 2016, we had about 8,000 employees. So 2/3 of the people were taken out. Now, if you look at what we had calculated at the time in terms of our multipliers, we had actually understood that a job that we had at ArcelorMittal Vanderbilt took care of between about 5 to 8 livelihoods. We also factor in the multiplier effect of our economic multiplier, that for every job we create, 2 indirect jobs were created. You could understand the impact that the cheap Chinese imports had in the country. But having said that, I mean, talking about trust erosion, you'd recall that at the time we had the big issues that emanated from the Competition Commission investigations. Yeah. I think we had to start from scratch to set out a journey and a roadmap on how do we engage these respective stakeholders to try and regain the trust. We had communities that were at loggerheads with the company around our pollution around the area and the green belt, where there were all sorts of allegations around the impact we had on the water discharges and the cattle that were allegedly giving birth to deformed offsprings because of the water pollution. So we had a myriad of issues. And I think for me, what actually I think was very good experience was when we had a CEO that decided that we're going to set the tone from the top. And setting the tone from the top is something as simple as ensuring that the whole executive team goes to neighboring communities, look at the footprint in the neighboring communities, the whole executive engaged with the local municipalities, looking at what typical strategic partnerships could we find with the local municipalities to ensure that we're starting working on programs that are creating positive impact in communities. I mean, on dust emissions, for example, we actually had surrounding houses in Bophelong and Tirela, which is Bupatong, being asbestos roofs. We created a project there that removed asbestos roofs from about 15,000 houses, replaced them with proper IBR steel sheeting. But it did not only become a project where we just changed roofs, it became a job creation project, because as we walked through the walls, when we trained people, it became an employee volunteerism project, because we got some of our engineers to go into these communities to plow back the skills and assist in removing those asbestos roofs within the safety regulations. As you know, asbestos is classified as hazardous waste. So we had to actually train people to understand how to handle that waste. And that, for me, created economic spin-offs. It was a perfect partnership of social impact, where you're solving for a social problem, but you're building skills. You're also creating an opportunity for young people to earn an income in those communities. So that was a very good project for me, that I think was an example of how you can start building trust by just ensuring that social projects are not just philanthropic, but they work on the right impact, having engaged with stakeholders, listened to them, and humble yourself not to act like you've got all the solutions, but allow some space for co-creation of the solutions with the stakeholders. I think the second one was about how you communicate honestly and transparently. I mean, a lot of issues that we had found, they were legacy issues. And the one thing that we could have easily done was to be defensive. But we actually had set the tone around transparent, constructive social dialogue with stakeholders. And that led to the resolution of the Competition Commission fines. It led to us working with VEJA, the local NGO, around environmental issues. We engaged with Benchmarks Foundation around certain reports that were not very factual, that they issued around the steel industry and the impact in Themba Park specifically. I think that was the last time that there was a specific report during our time that was not corroborated by management and engagement. We started looking at skills program for communities. So for me, that is actually a good example of how you set leadership tone at the top to work on the social issues that are driving sustainability.
A remarkable example. And I think what stands out for me is that it's got to be sincere. It's got to be authentic and genuine engagement, that tone from the top. It can't just be developing something on a spreadsheet in a boardroom that looks good strategically on paper. But to your point, you've got to go and engage with the communities. You've got to roll up your sleeves and get your boots a little bit dirty. And that's really what encourages me about that example. It shows that what we can achieve when you have business and labor working together. And imagine we could bring government into a similar type of conversation as a third part of that leg, what we could do in South Africa, because I think that is a big issue still in the country, is kind of a lack of trust between the social partners. Now, speaking of social, I think, one of the three areas of ESG is social, as I said earlier, and you've clearly got lots of experience working in this domain, as you've just said. What is the best advice that you could give to a business looking to embrace and improve the social elements of their ESG strategies?
I think there's two things for me. One is, I've spoken about constructive dialogue, which is very key, but constructive dialogue happens when you really, really understand your stakeholders, understand what's important for them, understand why certain behaviors are postured the way they are postured. So sticking with the ArcelorMittal example, for example, we had the issue with the cheap Chinese imports. And we worked with the unions, educated the unions, at least our shop stewards, demonstrated to them what these impacts are in terms of the future of the jobs, in terms of the impact on the cost structure on the company, in terms of the general livelihoods that I've demonstrated in terms of the multipliers. And that culminated in high-level engagements with national offices of the unions. And I think the one symbolic gesture that came out of that, or symbolic action, was we went to government as a united front. Us, you used to toys of the unions marching against government or against. So you could call this a march of employer and employees, to government as a stakeholder, talking about we can't just ignore the reality of our breakfast being eaten by China. And we engaged on the steel tariffs. There was a study that was done, task team that was created. And the outcome of that was in 2016, we actually did sign a big agreement which settled the old competition commission issues, but also created a process where import tariffs would be studied and brought in place, and safeguard against some steel categories would be brought in place. And that was achieved. And for me, that is working together as stakeholders into a united front. The second one is about how do we create the understanding of shared value. Now, shared value happens if business prospers, and business has the power to integrate society by ensuring that when we grow as a business, employees, people in communities, government sees the benefits through our flows of value. So for me, the second one is really understanding what our impact is in society and in our ecosystems where we operate, ensuring that, when we report on sustainability, we move away from just reporting because it's a tick-box exercise, but reporting to unpack the flows of value per stakeholder group and ensuring that those stakeholders understand what we are reporting on, they can engage with us. And I think on an engagement part is, we get hung up on materiality assessments. But for me, stakeholders appreciate a listening ear, however minor the issue is, because that's a starting point into bigger conversations. So if from a kind of desktop materiality, you start kind of deciphering issues and eliminating issues without a real engagement and understanding where they come from, you actually lose it. So it's about having an open and listening ear and ensuring that people see the value of that engagement into changeable actions. And I cannot overemphasize the whole issue of co-creation with stakeholders.
It sounds like a role that really requires someone with deep EQ, as well as obviously all the technical expertise and proficiencies in order to be able to execute on that. And just to build on what you achieved in the steel industry, we now have the Steel Master Plan, which has gone one step further in terms of trying to bring all of the stakeholders together. And obviously, it's not perfect; it's a living document. But I was at the CIFSA conference earlier this year, and I've been very encouraged because you're seeing big business take hands with government in a way that I've not seen before, and labor, and it's encouraging. I mean, again, nothing's perfect. We're all working on this and walking on this road together, but it starts with that ability to be able to listen to each other and hear what the other side's concerns are genuinely. Now, I think one of the most challenging things you probably had to deal with in your role at Sibanye was what happened with the Marikana tragedy. Now, you obviously weren't there at the time, but it's some legacy issue that, it's bigger than an issue. It's a legacy lesson. It's a legacy history lesson in what we shouldn't be doing into the future if we want to really build trust. Can you just tell us your story about how you've approached Marikana in particular, which still, after 10 years remains a sore point?
Yeah. Tragically, actually, because there's two things for me. I think we understood that we were not there in Marikana. We took London operations in 2019. We went in with the philosophy that we are going to listen. And again, tone from the top. The first meetings that we've had with stakeholders, we had our CEO in the room. We engaged with the widows of Marikana. We engaged with the women of Sikala Sonke in Marikana. We engaged with faith-based leaders. We engaged with employees. And we didn't have preconceived ideas of what the solutions would be. We might have had like thoughts, having listened to commentaries on what could be kind of the root causes and what should we be doing. But I think for me, the biggest lever that you can ever pull in a society that is in pain and that has experienced the tragic events of Marikana 2012 is to strive to be a catalyst for social cohesion and unity. And what we had found when we got to Marikana is there were 44 victims of that tragedy. And unfortunately, because of affiliations, and you would see it if you follow the news clips and the news over the years, there's always 34 victims being commemorated every year on the 16th of August. But the events of Marikana happened between that week of the 10th up until the 16th. Yeah. And from the 10th, it was a lot of kind of violence, labor violence, and I think it was
security
rivalry as we understood it, and people died. And the only 34 that died that are always commemorated are people that died at the Kopi at the hands of the state. And we got in there, and what we had found was the 10 families were ostracized because actually their storyline and their pain was minimized because it was not newsworthy, because the state could not be fingered. And we listened to all these families, and we found that there had been processes that had taken place. The 34 victims had actually, some of them started getting compensation in all sorts of the claims that they'd made to the state, and the 10 had actually been left out in the cold. So we thought, how do we approach this? Firstly, we didn't want to get into the room and be this big employer that knows all the answers. We said, let us approach a neutral person that's going to come and talk about healing, reconciliation, and unity. We then approached the Archbishop, Themba Nkosi, the Archbishop of Cape Town. We asked him to be the patron of Marikana. We also then decided to appoint Reimagine South Africa, who are known to drive social dialogue and social cohesion processes, to actually be the facilitator of the processes. So the Arch is a convener, Reimagine is facilitating. They went and started a consultative process with all the families. We actually drove the hills and valleys of the Eastern Cape with the bishop to go and pay homage to the families of the victims. And it was a very emotional situation, because some of the families were actually grateful that for the first time in 9 years, somebody has knocked on their doors to come and just listen to their pain and what would healing look like for them. Not all the assumptions that were happening on all these years. So what we also found was we need to have a process that we're going to hang all these initiatives on. So we created a Themba process, and the Themba process was premised on 3 areas. One was honor, the other one was engage, and the third pillar was create. We realized that healing can only take place when there's acknowledgement. So how do we acknowledge what transpired? How do we honor the victims and the colleagues and the pains of the families at the time when we want them to find closure in their hearts? I think the story of Marikana is a story that's affected the rest of South Africa. It's affected the world. Up until today, we're still dealing with the global NGOs on the promises that were made at the time and how in their heads they perceive the solutions to be and how we are not following up on those solutions. But nonetheless, so the honor chapter of the progress of the program was about how do we become inclusive in the approach. And we decided with the families, having listened to them, that they will find closure if we actually properly commemorate what transpired. And all 44 families. Now, what is very interesting and encouraging is that even the families whose sons, husbands, brothers didn't die at the Kopi have agreed that the most appropriate place to set up a commemorative stone or whatever monument that we're going to do is the Kopi. That's a big tick, because that on its own had divided the families. You know, the Kopi had always been synonymous with the one union, which was AMCU, and the other victims, I would recall, would have been NUM members and all that. So that was one uniter in terms of let us not monopolize the pains of families. Now, in the Themba process, we had actually sought out to work and invite all stakeholders. So we've worked with faith-based organizations, NGOs. I mean, even some of the NGOs that were very critical of us, some of those that actually had objected to Sibanye-Stillwater taking those operations, we've actually been interested. We've made significant progress. Everybody's under the tent, except AMCU. Now we can have a separate conversation about why is AMCU not part of the process, but we continue to engage with them, inviting them, listening to them, and trying to get them into the process. So we also then heard from the widows that they want to ensure that their kids are taken care of. So obviously when we got to Marikana, there was already a trust that had been set by Lonmin at the time, and that was a 1608 trust, which was supposed to take care of the children's education. And that trust has got about 139 beneficiaries, which would be children of the deceased. To date, it has spent about 64.5 million on various programs. And the trust has actually to date produced 3 postgraduates. One of them is a doctor with a PhD in agriculture. And yeah, amazing story. I mean, 14 others are tertiary graduates in other fields of studies. We only, have 11 high school dropouts. The rest of the kids are in school. We've actually looked at the education structure, restructured the program, took kids out of public school. We've sent them to the best multiracial schools and private schools. And we are hoping that out of this pain, we will produce a child of a miner that has a choice of working at the mine, not because that's been the legacy that when your father dies at the mine, the eldest in the family takes that job. Yeah. They have a choice to come back to work at the mine as professionals, and they would have exercised that choice not out of poverty, but out of a career choice. So that's number one. The second part,
the next chief sustainability officer, maybe in the future. But I
amazing.
In fact,
sorry, Michael. In fact, the guy Mandla, Dr. Yawa, is actually in my team and is doing a lot of work for us around alternative economic livelihoods in mining towns as well as labor-saving areas. So he's actually doing projects in his hometown that will be funded by the company.
And with his experience, I'm sure bringing that to bear on the project, right? And what was the second point?
The second point is of the 44 victims, every family has a representative that has been offered a job to earn an income, either a widow or a brother to the deceased or the eldest child of the family at the time. All of them are employed. So when you hear these stories about, the tragedy has left poverty, people don't have livelihoods, that's nonsense. Yeah. Thirdly, we've engaged with the state and the Solicitor General. You would have heard in the 10th anniversary, there were numbers that were put out there around what has been compensation. Now, I must say, compensation has been to the 34 victims who suffered at the hands of the state. Now, we've realized that the legal process for the other 10 people is individuals that would have been fingered to have inflicted the pain that led to the fatality. And there's been no prosecution. What we've done is we've actually committed to assist the other 10 families to get justice. And justice in the form that we will see if the police drive the docket up to successful prosecution. If they can't, they need to give us an answer that says, okay, we've got it to this point. We cannot successfully prosecute the matter. We're closing it. And then we will then look at what other legal capacity can we try and source to get this thing to be reviewed, even if we go private prosecution. That's what we're prepared to do. We're pledging money to that. We are also having other considerations, working with like-minded organizations in terms of considering creating a social welfare fund that we think will assist with the livelihood of the families. I mean, as I've said, all these families have actually got an income earner into the family. Some of them would have been compensated from the normal employee benefits in terms of your 3 times annual salary, a debt, and your fund credit. We got to understand the quantums of the monies that have been paid by the state, ranging from R1 million to 2.5 million. Unfortunately, I mean, those were private and confidential agreements. We still haven't unpacked that, but we're hoping to see what we can also do to help those people to learn how to manage this money responsibly. Because, I mean, that quantum amount of money could just disappear in the hands of somebody who doesn't know what to do with so much money.
And what
so
is,
I think...
what is the outcome, sorry, Tim, but of all of this engagement, which really is thoughtful, which really has been deep and searching and beyond just trying to express that you've done a materiality impact assessment and you're ticking boxes, you're going above and beyond. How has that been received in and around the community? And maybe if you could just touch on, why AMCU hasn't decided to come into the tent. Is it purely for labor politics and those sorts of reasons?
Yeah. So in the community, I think this has been well received. I think we're at the point right now where we've developed a Marikana Renewal Vision 2034, working with the multi-stakeholders that I had mentioned. And we're hoping that this, and in fact, local municipalities included in that. We've had GCIS from national government included. We're hoping that this vision would actually work and integrate within and align with some of the district development model initiatives that they're talking about. Government has looked at mining towns and has seen that there's a big opportunity for impact, but we need to get kind of one district, one plan, such that all the things that we're doing as SLPs are going over and above a functional municipality, and they have the right impact that we want. So there's been a renewal steer core that has been set up. The Kopi Memorial, we have actually set a task team led by families. So we've actually allowed the work to happen at the level where people could actually feel that they're integrated into the work, they own it. We are working towards a socio-economic compact, which for me would ensure that the renewal program stretches over and above the healing around the Marikana pain, but creates a space for us as an employer and as an economic partner in the social compact, socio-economic compact, to also catalyze other outcomes. I mean, for example, that from the value that we create, we are looking at the K4 shaft that is being built or restarted, and that's a big investment of about 4.5 billion. Those are the flows of values. We're looking at how we create SMMEs that are capable and capacitated to participate meaningfully in the economic renewal. We have also looked at various projects, and I'll talk later on about the projects that we are working on, which I think will unlock a lot of value. So we believe that out of the Marikana pain, we can actually create a social model that we can take and plug in the Free State where we work with stakeholders, in the West End where we work with stakeholders, because outside of the labor relations situation, Marikana 2012 found a social bubble of inequality, poverty, and high unemployment.
Yeah.
And it just integrated into a perfect storm.
Yeah, that was the tinder that was really struck when those shots were fired in Marikana back in 2012 on small Kopi, and that hasn't gone away to a large extent, but it is now at least being addressed. So I mean, that is the good news to have emerged from all of this, and the positive out of what has been a very difficult period for the mining industry. Just lastly, Themba, as we're running out of time, and just looking into your crystal ball there, with all of this experience, what sort of trends do you expect to see in the ESG space, particularly in terms of the social aspect that we've been discussing?
Yeah. So the last leg of what we're doing in Marikana is create, which plays into that space in terms of how do we move forward and what do we think needs to be happening. I think changing the narrative in Marikana from a story of tragedy, pain, and grief to a story where stakeholders work together, and they strive for prosperity and they rise from adversity to create social cohesion, is what I think is the challenge of the future for sustainability. So, for example, we work in Marikana. It's a tribal authority land that is owned by Bapoba Mohale. You know the stories of Bapoba Mohale that have been reaching the disappearing 460 odd million from the D account. We are working with Bapoba Mohale to firstly create capacity in line with the Sustainable Development Goals of functional states and traditional authorities. We're working with them. There's programs in place to create capacity. We are collaborating with them to use the monies earned out of the ownership trust to build big social impact programs. We have programs where we've partnered on agricultural projects, on bursaries for locals, on SMMEs upskilling, which will then have a spin-off of business opportunity inside the company. So for me, in terms of the lessons learned, I think the lessons learned is that, we cannot walk this alone, number one. Number two, for healing to happen and trust to be rebuilt, there has to be acknowledgement. And for me, the acknowledgement should actually go beyond just Marikana. It's an acknowledgement that says mining in South Africa today, in terms of trust, is not trusted based on the history of where we find ourselves as a country and the role that mining industry played in terms of displacements, in terms of migrant labor system, and all the other social ills that kind of were falling out of that, both directly and indirectly. And that will create a space where we can move forward and say, mining has a role to play in this country. In fact, business in general. And we are catalysts of development. We want to work with all stakeholders to ensure that we create inclusive development. However, that cannot happen if we don't create a social environment that is stable so that business can operate. It won't happen if we do not create policies and regulations that are enabling businesses to operate, because a lot of our social ills are surrounded by lack of growth. So we're not going to solve for unemployment if we are not growing the economy. We're not going to grow the economy if the operating environment is unstable. So part of our kind of strategic essentials in Sibanye-Stillwater is prospering in every ecosystem where we operate. But you cannot prosper in an ecosystem when you are not working with stakeholders. You cannot work alone. You cannot be an island that has money, because then that money won't go anywhere. So if we are successful in creating the Marikana renewal, and we work very well with the government, at all spheres of government, we would have a well-integrated district development plan, would have functional local government municipalities that are able to deliver basic services. Whatever we bring as mining houses in terms of social and labor plans will be supplementing a functional kind of locality, such that those things become extras. We'll be able to pull resources as the mining industry and say, how can we do more for common good, not for legislation, not for compliance, but going beyond compliance. And it's always easier to go beyond compliance if the companies are prospering, because we can deliver. I mean, we have an umdori tree, and there's another conversation which talks about we need to have a tree that is healthy, that's going to bear fruits. And those fruits become, the spin-offs that are going to accrue from a value flow into the various stakeholders, being the environment, being the people, being the communities, being our own employees through employee share schemes in terms of creating value from what they earn out of salaries. And in my parting short is, simply put, Sibanye employs 84,900 people, including contractors. If you think about the economic multipliers of that, one miner takes care of about between 5 and 8 people. Yeah. So we're looking after, close to 10 livelihoods. It's 45,000 kind of people multiplied by that. One job that we create in an ecosystem creates 2 other jobs, indirectly. So that's 10. So easily you could say we're responsible for 1 million livelihoods in South Africa, and we cannot prosper if the economic or rather the social conditions are not good for business to play a socio-economic compact role as a business partner in an environment that is conducive for business.
Well, Themba,
then we can really do more from a sustainability.
Absolutely. And that is, to me, is real sustainability, because a business can come in and it can intervene, but that is definitely on a temporary basis unless you've got a functioning municipality providing the basic services from which all else can stabilize and everything else can grow from. So, when you talk about this sustainability journey, that to me is really the spirit of it, and beyond the kind of box ticking that has created some cynicism. Fantastic chatting to you, Themba Nkosi, Chief Sustainability Officer at Sibanye-Stillwater. Thank you so much for sharing your insights into the big S in ESG here on Business Talk. Take care.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks for having me.